Oh, okay, yeah, so we can start with those two.
Which one?
Discussions. Yeah, and then we can, by the time we get here, we'll be
Oh,
good.
we're gonna start with general discussion
Yeah,
first.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'll
Perfect.
make that motion to revise.
Okay. Awesome.
Alrighty.
Oh, we'll call it we're opening the Housing and Human Welfare regular committee meeting. Call to order. Alderwoman Tierney.
At present,
Alderman Shandelmeyer is on his way. Alderman Gay, present. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move a revision to the agenda to start the discussion with, start with the general discussion items, ID 35-23 being one of them, and then relocation expenses, because we don't have a quorum to discuss the legislation on the agenda.
So move.
I move you second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Does that work, right? Awesome.
Alrighty, so we're going
Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the Housing and Human Welfare meeting minutes from 2/21/23?
so moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Next item on the agenda is ID 3523, Public Safety Officials, Property Tax Exemption. Alderwoman, I'm curious to hear what you had, because we had been working on this incidentally simultaneously.
I know.
And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
My understanding, and this is a legal question, is that anything, we would need enabling legislation from the state to give a property tax exemption. The legislation proposes to give our public safety officials a property tax exemption. And I've always understood that we don't do tax legislation. It's the state. So I had a discussion with Sarah Elfreth about this like 9 months ago or something, and I don't know where they are with it. If they, and I'm sorry about that, because they're doing cross
Today, yeah.
so they know what they have. But I thought that was what was necessary. What, Cynthia?
So can we get 2 points of information from first the policy analysis, Cynthia Router, and then from our legal counsel today, Joelle Brightway. As she's mentioned, she's reached out to the state senator months ago before I even came to you with this legislation, but we weren't communicating that, and so I had submitted the request to you. It's my understanding that the legislation that we had drafted was based off of previous legislation that was passed in 2006, and so it is legal, correct?
Cynthia Reuter, Office of Law Policy Analyst. So the state, a while ago, I don't know exactly when, passed a law that lets municipalities waive certain property taxes for first responders.
Wow.
911 operators and police, basically. Several cities have adopted that, have decided to do it. So you write your own legislation and then it applies to that community. Annapolis just has never done it, but it's an opportunity that's out there for the city to do.
Wow. So we have enabling legislation from
The state has the enabling legislation allowing us to do that.
Okay, run with it.
So the question then to law is that, my question then is, because I'd like to just get a better understanding, what's the difference between us moving forward with, because I think gosh, I'm blanking on that piece of the code that has the property tax deferment for senior citizens, I believe. How do we take it a step further and just stay and the difference in maybe in the code, in the language, in deferment and exemption? Is deferment defined in the city code? And you could get this back to us and not tonight, at any other time. When we look at deferment in the code, is that defined by a specific period of time? And so are you only allowed to defer the taxes a year, 2 years, 3? Is that set, or can we create the language for that?
That is also, that law was handled the same way as the property tax for 911 operators.
Okay.
The state passed a law that allows municipalities to have that deferment. Annapolis took advantage of that. So the language for that deferment comes from the state. It's not a city definition, it's a state allowance.
Same with exemption?
Yep.
So we could propose the exemption as opposed to just a deferment, because my fear is that, like, yes, it's good that you could purchase the home initially and defer the property taxes maybe for a year or two, but then you have to pay back however much you've deferred. Yeah.
Right. You have to pay it back, or the money comes out of the estate if somebody dies. Right. Pay it back if you sell it, or the money comes out of the estate. But the parameters of that are set by the state, and we don't have leeway to change that.
Okay.
So it's the state language is a deferment?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah. The state is very strict in what it allows municipalities to do on a lot of things.
So that was probably the misunderstanding, that Senator Elfrith was looking at a exemption. But, do you have that bill?
Yeah, I was
Do you
just,
have a-
I was about to say if that was my, yeah.
Yeah. Do you have that bill?
Or-
The state bill? That you're
Which
referring-
bill?
The bill that you're referring to?
The deferment or the property tax?
The state's enabling legislation that allowed the municipalities or counties to.
I have it in my notes, so I can find it and email it to you.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
All right.
As well as the rough draft that we have, so that Brooks and our Alderman Schendermeyer and Alderman Tierney will have an opportunity to, kind of run their eyes over it. Will you be assigned to this, Joel, from law as the housing?
Not necessarily. All assignments remain the prerogative of the city attorney, so he will find the appropriate person to assign any requests that come through Office of Law.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to see what a timeline would look like. Because I think if we have general consensus, at least amongst the committee, which I believe we do, that
Yeah,
this
I'd
is
like to
something,
be added as a co-sponsor.
that we could push forward. You actually could be added as a lead sponsor, because it's still in the draft, and this was partly your idea as well. So
Oh, no, yeah, no.
yeah,
And it's sad because there's not much inventory for workforce housing, but this is at least an effort.
well, yeah, and I think in particularly in some of Ward 6, now Ward 4, and Ward 5 have
Housing.
some opportunity
Sure.
in,
Yeah.
similarly to Alderman Schendermeyer in his community.
Yeah.
And so there is opportunity. I'd like to definitely make a request to, once we have the draft and email to us, that we'll submit it to law and get that started. Awesome. Any other questions on this?
No.
Okay. Let's move to the next item on the agenda, which is the landlord-tenant relations relocation expenses. So we started this similarly when we started 04922, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Rotter. Did we start this at the same time? I thought, is this the same bill? No, you're totally fine. Is this the same bill that we started in November? The landlord-tenant relations relocation? Okay, yeah. Okay, so, but the problem was is that I introduced 04922 at the same time. And then I thought that by introducing this, it would have undermined the process of 04922. But this is timely nonetheless. And this is going back to the committee meetings that we had in October, where we had the property management before us, and in the tenants listed out their concerns. I already know right off the bat the one thing that we'll have to amend to this, but I'm glad to have it in physical copy, so that we can start to make the necessary amendments, is that we'll have to add some sort of fee for transportation, because that was the one thing that the Office of Planning and Zoning had recommended when we met with their inspectors. Because oftentimes what's happening is that, you know, if my child is going, if I you know, have my house and it's failed inspection, and so now they're having to move me, right? And I live in Eastport Terrace or Harbor House, and my child is going to Eastport Elementary School, but they moved me to the cheapest hotel possible off of Riva Road. How is my child getting to school? Now, when we had the superintendent of schools here in our work session, he said the county is working on a homeless transportation process, because right now, I believe they're operating off 1 or 2 buses for the entire county. And so it's just creating a number of problems and creating extensive absences in our communities. And so I want to address that with an amendment. I'll try to get the amendment to us before the next meeting, and I'll introduce this and the public safety legislation at the exact same time, and we can work those through our committee.
I think the superintendent talked about vans that he added too.
He did,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. Which I think will be helpful. But in the meantime, I just think it's important that all options are exhausted in the legislation and to help the families. And if it doesn't work, then we just pull that portion of the bill. But nonetheless, most of the parameters in this are important. You know, we heard about people having mold growing on their clothes and on their appliances, etc., and they're not receiving the appropriate the accommodations. One, yes, because they're being sent to poor hotels, but they're also not receiving the appropriate compensation, is a term I was looking for. And so that they can buy new materials. And so let's get off a general discussion because we got a packed agenda. Do you have any other questions on this, either of you? Alderman Schandelmeyer? Alderwoman Tierney? No? Okay. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, closing out the general discussion. 1 second. The next item on our agenda is 05022, landlord and tenant relations, rent guidelines. I do have questions because I may be livid and have to pull this legislation tonight. I sent out amendments to the committee. I think everybody had an opportunity to review them. But some of the most important ones are not legal or don't appear to be. And that's what I am trying to figure out. I think you sent back, Mrs. Rauter, an email in regards to amendments 7 and 9, I think. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, amendments 2 and 9 did not make it through the process. Could you make a copy of this for the city attorney? Awesome, thank you. Just so I can have him on those questions. I'm not. If you could explain as to, why 2 and 9 weren't acceptable. I guess my confusion was that other cities in the state utilize a very similar process of authority within their boards, and we even have similar boards with the same authority. And so, for example, Amendment 9 is it added responsibilities. The board shall have the following jurisdictions and authorities: to hear, review, and approve or deny landlord applications for rent increases greater than those allowed by rent stabilization ordinance, to hear, review, and approve or deny landlord appeals for rent increases due to renovations or reconfigurations of existing units, to impose such fines as are necessary and allowed for violation of the provision of the rent stabilization ordinance, record in their report and update the state's, city's rental unit availability, and establish fines. And so I wasn't sure what the trouble was because the board wasn't established yet, so we were giving them the responsibilities, or at least that's how I thought I was writing it.
Right. The amendment went beyond the scope of the bill. The bill was set up for a voluntary, for a board or commission. You can go either way. And this board or commission would then recommend guidelines for landlords and renters.
So
So you went from its voluntary guidelines to having the authority to issue fines.
well, yeah, I thought that was my intent. And I also am not, where does it say voluntary still? Because I thought that actually was removed. Because the version that I have says, for the purpose of developing rent guidelines, creating a rent stabilization board to create and oversee the guidelines,
Right.
setting rent increase notice requirements, generally concerning rents and landlord-tenant relations. And so I view that as broad.
Guidelines are non-binding.
Okay, is that Mr. City Attorney? Is that illegal? So I'm confused on that. Could you explain that and why the guidelines wouldn't be binding?
It depends on how guidelines are created as part of, if it's part of a law or ordinance, for example. Guidelines will be non-binding because the guidelines are in certain instances are set to allow people to understand where things should be applicable. If the person who's creating the law wanted to make the guidelines law, they would have made it law by putting it into the legislation. But if the guidelines are not part of the legislation, then they're just binding, and you must be guided by the rules of the ordinance that was passed.
Okay, so in order for me to make it effective, I would essentially have to create an amendment that includes the rent parameters and any other guidelines I'd like the board.
Because again, with guidelines, you're giving someone the discretion to apply them or not apply them or to interpret what they mean, as opposed to the law, which is the word of the law.
So is the difference here, Cynthia, I'm sorry, Mrs. Ryder, what you're saying is that by an amendment number 9, because we're allowing the board to create the guidelines, and to the point that the city attorney has just made, is basically null and void because the board is establishing them as opposed to the council.
No. The issue is how the legislation was drafted initially. Amendments cannot go beyond the scope of the original bill. And then it would be considered non-germane.
You know,
Because it changes the purpose of the bill.
that makes me think of Eric Mays, the counselor. He says, when people say stuff is non-germane, he says, I am Tito, Michael, and, you know, the Jacksons, Jermaine, you get it?
Jackson. I know.
No.
But now being germane to the point, because I'm serious about amendment number 9, but I had to throw that joke in. How is that not germane to the legislation? I'm confused. It's specific to exactly what we set out for the board to follow up on. If the board is going to establish those guidelines, wouldn't they have to hear, review, and approve applications for rent increases greater than that allowed?
The bill says that the board can recommend what increases should be. It doesn't establish its ability to have hearings like that.
Okay.
But this is also an issue that would probably be better handled by Mr. Lyles, our parliamentarian.
Separately, you mean? You mean separately? Is that what you're saying? Or-
Right.
Yeah.
A member of the council can offer any amendment they want, basically. The council has the right to do that. So you can offer these amendments if you desire to go ahead with them.
Yeah, but the problem is that the legislation just would be pointless. Because I mean, it's essentially allowing, I'm gonna have to scrap this. Because it's just, I mean, without amendment number 9 and without giving the board authority, I'm essentially just saying, okay, we have this make-believe board and they're going to set guidelines, but then the landlords get to come in and say, oh, well, it's non-binding. And so they aren't going to be able to enforce anything. And that's the biggest disappointment, because we just can't keep letting them get away with this, man. I'm going to bring this legislation back. I'm going to pull it from the agenda in its entirety, because if I put in too many amendments, it's going to be too confusing and nobody's going to
Right, you know how.
support the bill. So I'm scrapping 05022. I'm going to pull that. Do I make a motion here or do I save it for? I make a motion to remove 05022 from the agenda.
Second.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. I'll come back to that legislation. We need to, because we got these freaking landlords walking all over top of everybody in the city. It's not just about anybody on this individual dais, it's about the entire city in general. In one of our communities, there's families of 15 sharing apartments because rent is so freaking high here. Nobody can survive. It's crazy.
Well-
And we have to do something, seriously.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I look forward to the new version of this. We also do need to stress that the reason it got so bad, that they have that much ability to go, you accept this or you move, is a lot of housing proposals to actually legalize smaller apartments or housing types and more housing types in the city come up short. It's not just them, it's this legislative body for the past 15 years has been the bad guy in housing politics. And I know we're up here on this dais, we're trying to actively find solutions. We're going to get to a potential one of them next, but I want to say to folks, the reason your rent is so high is, yes, your landlord has a lot of leverage on you, but the reason they have so much leverage over you is because the city makes building housing so impossible. It's supply and demand that literally defines every single economy since economies have been a thing. When you have a high demand for something like housing and a low supply, only the elites get it.
Any comment on 05022?
Other than it's disappointing, but I look forward to the resubmittal.
Awesome. I'm going to bring it back quickly. I had 9 amendments to bring in a 10th that would have reconfigured the entire bill, would have put us in the same ship we are in with 049. So we'll bring it back with substance. One of the things, I guess, before we close out on that portion of the agenda, if a request could be made to the Office of Law, what authorities do our boards and commissions have? Because I know I ran into a similar issue when I was trying to create another board or give planning and zoning or the planning commission additional authority, and we ran into issues there with the state superseding our code as it relates to boards and commissions. So if we could have maybe an opinion from the Office of Law on what actually we could do with our existing boards in regards to making changes, and then when we create legislation for new boards and commissions, how far can we go? What authority can we actually give the boards? Because I envision this board as quasi-government, similar to that of the Planning Commission or the Board of Appeals. And so, is that something that would need legislation from the state for us to enable? I can't believe so, because I'm seeing Laurel, Greenbelt, Montgomery County, Rockville, which is in Montgomery. I mean, all of these places are passing rent guideline legislation. And so I'm not, yeah, so that would be helpful, please. Should I make the request in writing, or?
Yes, a request in writing going to the city attorney would be very helpful.
All right, I'll do that. We could close out on 05022. Next item on the agenda is 04022, workforce housing, for the purpose of allowing workforce housing as permitted use. Yes, Alderman Schandelmeyer.
I'm very excited to share this publicly, Mr. Chairman. Last week, the Teachers Association of Anne Arundel County endorsed this legislation.
I was ecstatic to hear that too, and I'm grateful for you putting in the work and garnering that support, honestly. And so that'll be significant moving forward.
So this has now received support from our Teachers Association, our firefighters union. The working people of this city support this legislation because they know how hard it is to get by on their salaries here.
So let's start with these amendments. Looking at 04022, addendum to staff report to Planning Commission, which came out on 11/18. And then I'm gonna pull up the version of the bill that I have. And we're just gonna run through these amendments.
Oh, so we have amendments.
Well, we've always had amendments,
Yeah,
but
but
we
we
never,
consolidated
well, they
them.
weren't written, so we didn't have a chance to
Right, yeah.
go over, they didn't have a chance to go over everything. So let's go, all right? The first amendment I'm seeing on here is add to the proposed common open space definition. And then it says common open space should be provided for passive and or limited active recreational activities. The amendment the amendment was to include F, the definition. Common open spaces shall be identified on the subdivision plat, and restrictions on its location and use that doesn't make sense. Common open space shall be identified on the subdivision plat, and restriction on its location and use delineated. Any changes to the use or location of common open space shall require the approval of the Department of Zoning through a subdivision amendment. Is that the correct amendment for common open space? I'm assuming that these are all correct because they're from the staff, or they're from the, from our last meeting in November. No? Okay, so we'll skip that one. Site design plan review.
Are you reading from the planning,
I am,
November 18th?
Yes.
The addendum to the staff report?
yes.
Okay,
That's where all of our amendments were.
right.
This was essentially, on the first one, it also says, recommended amendments, line 24. The purpose clause of the ordinance should be amended to begin as follows. The purpose of allowing workforce housing that is affordable to households, we're striking earning 60 to 100% and adding with an income that does not exceed 120% of the area median income. You see that?
Yeah, there, yeah.
Yeah, right here.
There-
Hold on this one.
The second page, third page.
Right there.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
So, do we take the vote do I read out the amendment as on line 24? We would like to strike earning 60 to 100% with an income that, or we would like to strike earning 60 to 100%, and we would like to add with an income that does not exceed 120% of the area median income.
Could I make it easier and say, I mean, I don't know if we've extracted these amendments, but is there a way of accepting this in one, I mean, ultimately, we have to have an amendment on Granicus, and can we, Cynthia, I need your help with this, like, could we extract these amendments as one amendment? And, you know, amendments as per, I think I've done this before, amendments as per the planning commission's November, and just refer.
To refer to the document.
I mean, like, right,
Well, that would be easier, and I would prefer that as well.
yeah, and then we wouldn't have 20 amendments. But I don't know if that's doable, because are there corrections on here too? In other words, just call this whole thing an amendment. How's that? Can we do that, Cynthia? I go to you.
Thank you.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is there anything that we disagreed with in this report? No. It's kind of, and if we,
Are you saying you want to move the entire amendments as a block?
yeah, I want to move the whole, the document essentially reference is this memorandum, right? Yeah, that, it's all.
I think it's fine to move it as a
Record
block.
amendments on page 3.
I mean, otherwise it's 1, 2,
I know, it will never pass.
or it's 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yeah.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 amendments. As I'm reading this,
What does it do, what do you think? Amend the block?
so we would have to just go through line by line.
Legal question, or Regina? Yes, call him Regina.
Can I just say that there was a first reader version. Somewhere along the line, there became another version, which you're currently amending, right?
Oh,
So you're not incorporating your amendments right now or making them associated with the first reader version that was adopted by the council.
I didn't know that. There is a version different than the first reader?
Is it, Eric, I think that's right? Okay, so planning and zoning's version has the amendments in it, I mean, the document that you're attaching your amendments to? Is that what you're doing?
No, let me try to correct the situation. There was a different version than first reader. We got it, there was some guidance from the law office that we needed to use the first reader as part of this process,
Right.
make amendments to that. And then in the staff report, we added all of the clarifications and amendments that had been incorporated into that additional improved version of the legislation. So everything in that staff report are items that the affordable housing affordability and community equity development commission and staff and this committee had basically already approved, and that before we had to kind of go back to the first reader. So we just tried to summarize all of those changes.
Using the first reader.
Yeah,
Public first
basically,
reader as a baseline.
what is the difference in the first
Yeah.
reader and that improved piece of legislation?
Yeah,
We tried just basically bulleted out all of the edits that were made. And that's what went into that staff report.
okay. So there isn't a different version. Everybody's working off the same page. It's just this is what didn't get into the first reader and would have to be
We-
amended.
I guess we recognize that those bulleted points in the staff report are not worded as they should be, right? I mean, there's some, so I think there's some work that would still need to happen by the law office to sort of make them consistent with the legislation conventions.
Right,
But
these have to be,
and then that other document, the addendum, the staff report addendum, that was created following the Planning Commission to address their concerns that were raised. So it added additional amendments, but that long list in the first staff report, that's pretty comprehensive of what had gone into the improved legislation.
so there's amendments on the November 18th document as well, which was in the 3 pages. It was an addendum to the staff report. We sort of had a similar situation with the maritime bill that you
Yeah,
had.
we
you had
certainly did.
recommendations and
We
then
certainly
we
did, yeah.
pulled them.
And I feel like with that, if I remember correctly, there was
Yeah.
an amendment that gathered all of those changes together. But
So that's what
they were
I'm.
mostly clarifications.
What I'm suggesting, Duan, is if we call, say, Amendment 1, and paragraph would read suggested amendments per the staff report to the Planning Commission and list them, but we could still, because the title of the amendment is, staff recommendations, amendments, and then just group them into one amendment. Can we do that instead of that each identifying them each as an amendment? Well, you'd have to have line references.
I think that some of the bullet points and some of the summary versions and things, you can't just pull them over into the legislation because it's not in legislative format. So
Yeah,
basically, if you didn't like the first reader version and your amendments were in a legislative format, what you wanted, we could just make that one amendment and amend the first reader to delete everything and insert what you want. But it would have to be in legislative format, I think, right, Cynthia? Yeah, it's not in a format to be just an amendment to the first reader. It won't work.
And that's where I'm confused.
well,
Because what is legislative format?
The whereases
Well-
and things like that.
I mean, a lot of the,
you do have line, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, but
No, no,
let me just, okay, so the November.
Yeah, no, 11th to 2012, page
Gotcha.
3, yeah.
Page 3, that is.
Has the line,
That's-
yeah.
That speaks to the first reader version, and there's line references. So we would,
All right, basically, what you have is your first reader. What you're going to end up doing is basically totally replacing the first reader because you're going to be making so many changes to it. The Robert's Rules of Order says
too
just
substantial.
swap it out. And then you amend the swapped out version. What you do not have yet is a version, your swap out version. To your replacement legislation. You don't have that yet. Once you have that, then you can go line by line and amend it. But right now you have basically just this needs to be changed, that needs to be changed, but it doesn't say exactly how it needs to be changed or where it is in the bill and all that. So basically, you need a new basis to start from so that then you could go through it line by line and scrub it and then make the changes you want.
Well, is that basis, there's really only one, I'm hearing that we're working off the same
Right.
basis.
So what you would have is the committee version
Yeah.
of the bill.
Right.
And that's what you don't have yet.
Which is still puzzling me because we've had this legislation since September and we've talked about it at like 5 meetings for hours and hours about every single possible amendment. And so the fact that out of any of those conversations, no amendments could have been drafted is insane. It's insane. And I'm not sure even where to go. Like,
The thing that I guess I'm confused by is there was a committee piece of legislation that we were told to not use, to go back to the first reader. And so like these changes were then summarized with the guidance that they then need to apply to the first reader. I mean, nothing is really changing the intent of the legislation substantially. I mean, it's all just clarifications. Delete line 71, 100% shall be amended to 120%. Line 85, delete this phrase, line 91, delete this phrase. I mean,
But the substantialness of it isn't the issue. It's the amount, the number of changes that need to be made throughout the legislation.
but where is that a clause that says you can't have X amount of amendments?
There's no rule that says that, but Robert's Rules of Order does suggest to avoid that because it is very confusing. And it's better just to write something new and fresh and replace it.
All right, well, what do y'all want to do? Because
Well, we haven't got anywhere with the amendments in the last meeting, we were supposed to draft them, right? And I think it just fell.
if I may,
I think we need to pull it and rewrite it, incorporating the planning department's document here.
Can I just say that if you pull it, you cannot reintroduce the bill in this session. You would be, it would be quicker and easier just for the committee to have its own bill, its replacement bill. And you just need to have the time to decide what you want in that.
is there a rule referencing redundancy in legislation?
It is in the legislative.
Redundancy?
You're saying I
Can
can't
you clear
introduce it again. So where does it say that at? That you can't pull legislation, fix it, and then introduce it again? Is
You
that,
postpone it and fix it.
But I'm saying,
She's
wh-
saying if you kill the bill, you can't introduce the same
I'm sorry, I
legislation in the
misspoke
same
then.
term.
yeah, where is that at?
It's in the legislative.
It's double jeopardy or
Yes,
something.
it's in, it is a,
I can find it. I
yeah,
don't
we can
have it.
find it, we don't. I
You
don't
can't
know exactly what
introduce
it is.
the
You
same
can't-
bill in the
yeah,
same session.
Really? Because there were several bills put in related to the short-term rental stuff. There were like 3 different versions. There were like 3 different versions of these parking bills for the outdoor dining.
They were not pulled and reintroduced. They were different versions of the same topic.
there is, I just want to say, I mean, there is a replacement bill that's like already written. I mean, I feel like we've gone through this already. There's a replacement bill that was
Yeah.
put together by the Affordable Housing Community Equity Development Commission and this committee. The process has just gone on for so long.
Yeah.
We had a replacement bill, and the intent was to swap them out, and there was guidance, or I'm not exactly sure what happened, but there was guidance that we needed to go back to the first reader.
Okay, don't stay
And-
with me, Dwan.
But those bills that you talk about were never run through the Office of Law.
Right.
Yeah.
And-
That's right.
Rights legislation.
Okay.
where I
That's
think the
the
breakdown is.
distinction. Okay.
Alderman Shandemeyer.
Right.
That's exactly what it was. Thank you.
So it is my understanding then that we could draft up a clean bill of 04022 with all of our amendments,
Yes.
introduce that as the committee version of 04022, keeping the number 04022. And that is what we could pass out of committee.
Right.
Correct.
That would be your committee's amendment, that one containing everything.
Okay,
Okay,
kind of where I, yeah.
so
That makes
But that is, again, where I'm confused. That is what we've been doing since November. Is drafting a bill, waiting 2 weeks, drafting another. It's like, we've done this 3 times.
No, we always knew, we had something on first reader that was incomplete or something, I don't know, wrong words, and we had this document, and we never extracted the amendments from this. So I think what I'm hearing from
Okay.
Brooks is.
I must be tripping. I mean,
it's a lot of legalese and process.
We didn't know how to do the
mumbo
amendments, I
jumbo.
guess, is the.
But if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think the best way to do this, because I'm damn proud of 04022 and the work that we did on it, and I think it deserves to see its day outside of this committee with our amendments. I think the easiest thing to do would be we get all of the stuff, the bill rewritten with the amendments, and introduce that as the committee version of 04022.
Right.
And
Office
we
of
knock
Law-
that out.
I'm
And
sorry.
we can, I'm willing to do a emergency meeting some point this month. We just got to find time where the 3 of us can get together.
Well, no, I think it's just really a matter of going through this document and saying what we want to include, which,
Alderman Tierney, when you say this document, are you referring to the addendum to staff report?
yeah, I'm referring to the, yeah.
Okay.
but so you're telling me you don't remember at our January meeting when we were like
Well, yeah.
starting the amendments, and then we realized, oh wait, we have the amendments, and so we went by line, and then we voted. So nobody remembers that? Us voting on amendments?
I do remember that, but I don't know if that got.
They never,
kept telling me.
How are our
Kept
amendments?
saying like you have to.
How are,
yeah,
that
we never
can't be.
voted
How
on
that can't
amendments.
be. We've had a full quorum. We discussed it in detail. The motion was made, laid on the floor, and voted on. How is it not how can it be carried forward? I'm really confused on
We
that.
never voted.
And because now we're having to postpone this again. I know we're up against the clock. I'm pretty sure it's been in committee for longer than 90 days and longer. And so how long has it been in committee? Are we aware of that?
Mr. Chairman, I believe Ms. Jackson has an answer to your question.
I just want to say, I agree with what Brooks said.
So.
Totally agree with what he says, what he said. Basically, you just need to make your amendments, your committee amendment, and substitute it for and adopt it on second reader as the final bill.
And that would be the final end of the process. We wouldn't need to vote them one at a time. We just
No.
literally,
Exactly,
okay.
So we need help doing that.
Yes.
exactly.
We need help.
It sounds like.
So do we,
Yeah, I think
Stay with me.
just
John.
working with the law office, I think, it could be pretty expedient. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah.
And with putting these documents together into a replaced bill, is that what we're doing? So it is a replacement bill.
It's gonna be your amendment to take, when that first reader gets to second reader, that's gonna be your committee amendment. And it's gonna say strike lines 1 on page 1 through line 29 on page 29, and put in whatever language you want. That's all we're doing.
Right. So this has been it went to committees in January. So you are coming up against the 3-month mark. However,
Now-
just to assure you, the Office of Law, we're standing by, and when the committee decides what you want in the legislation, we're ready to draft it.
We want these memos.
I figured, you could just go back and watch the meeting where we voted on it. And we laid it out, what we wanted in the bill. And so now we'll have to rush this because we're coming up against this 90-day window. I'm assuming the deadline, our first meeting was January the 21st. So would our deadline is our deadline tomorrow?
Does that 90-day rule
Oh, 6 days.
kill the legislation, or is that just we could bring it out of the committee if we want to?
The 90-day rule just pushes it back to the council, and the council can bounce it back to committee.
Okay, so, and we can request that it not go forward at that next council meeting because we're still working on it. So it doesn't even need to go to the council as a whole, because something similar happened with the accessory dwelling units legislation, 0921. It had surpassed 90 days through various committees, but it didn't end up going to the floor for a vote.
No, it would be on the agenda as a,
A motion to refer back to your committee?
Yeah, so we can just,
It sounds like we're further along than we thought in talking, sorry to interrupt, but the last meeting we did we drafted amendments. Can you tell us what, and we have that.
But we didn't draft amendments because we don't have amendments.
You didn't vote on it. It just didn't make it.
To vote, but they're ready for I mean, we can publish something following this replacement.
Right. You, if you want them there, with the language to exchange out.
I think it's, if I may, I think it's as simple as working with a Word document of the first reader and taking these proposed amendments from the staff report and basically just, doing a track changes, and, that would probably provide enough.
What date do we have to have this done before it has to go back to the council?
If it was 90 days,
So it'll be next month, the 17th?
it has to go.
We can also circulate that other version of the bill, of the ordinance that was done previously, just share that again. It was, the commission had provided that, so staff had tried to summarize those changes, but we could provide that again.
So the 17th of April, I think, is our 90-day deadline, if I'm not mistaken. So we have roughly 3 weeks to get any amendments together and finalize this legislation.
so if we're worried about the shot clock here, we can
Good word.
we can find an emergency meeting after we get all of the various documents into a single entity. And even then, if it goes in front of the full council before the committee's had its chance to finalize its recommendations and amendment process, I think it's not going to be a fight to kick it back to the committee. I know there's some controversy around this, but they're not going to.
You can have your meeting before April 7th.
Who knows? We can have the meeting before the 17th. That's not a problem. But it's also like, well, are we going to be able to get this done by the 31st next week? Because rules meets the 7th.
And this has to go to vote.
And so it's just like, all right, let's postpone the legislation. I make a motion to postpone 04022.
Second.
All in favor?
I'll make a motion to postpone 04022 until,
Next meeting.
no, because that's after rules.
Point of discussion on the postponement.
Can we interrupt a motion for a point of discussion? Okay, awesome.
Thank you. So if we get the committee's version together, we could pop it in front of rules. Okay.
But you've realized today is the 20th?
I have a calendar in front of me. But yeah, we have about
Let me see what you did.
There's over 2 weeks before the 7th though, so we have the time to get it all through.
This is it.
Yeah. So we got the time to get this in front of the law office, get it into a single document,
And we'd also have to find a date
intro it in rules.
in between here and now that the recording staff could meet. And when they would have availability. Do we have that calendar handy?
Give me a second.
I wanted to be voting and passing this to rules tonight, using this template that to me has all of our amendments written out on it, excluding maybe one or two that was discussed at the January meeting. But I thought,
You saying the date, please?
we'll have to,
It's the 22nd.
What do you think?
28th, 29th, the 30th, the 31st.
If you put it in the evening on any of those dates, I can make it. I'll just maybe a little bit late.
Can we
Tuesday
give that
before.
to the law office to?
Actually, rules is postponed on the 7th. We'll reschedule that because she will not be here. Alderwoman Finlayson won't be here.
Well,
You can have your meeting on.
all right, so we'll postpone the move 04022 until April the 17th.
But what's our path forward?
We'll get, in the meantime, hold on first, I had a motion on the floor. Can I get a second?
second.
Your question was, what's our path forward? I think we get together and put together the amendments. I'm going to go back and watch that video. I'm gonna find that video for Facebook tonight. And go back and check any amendments that we may have left off, because I know we talked about that in depth at the January the 17th meeting. I had a second. All in favor?
Julian said you might want to do it before the 17th because she might put her meeting in between. You know, yeah. She doesn't have a set date yet.
Well, we just had a motion on the floor that was voted on, so it's set. We can't really change it. And so if she makes up her mind in between, then we'll just have to figure out that. All right, any other items on the agenda? Next item on the agenda is R123. Mr. Lashinsky? R123 is Workforce Housing Development Planning in the City of Annapolis. I think you have a quick presentation on that?
Yeah, I don't have a presentation. I mean, I don't have a
Well, we have the
slideshow.
yeah, we have the physicals.
You have the handouts.
Yep.
Great.
Kayla, would you hold this for me?
Yeah, so give this to Cynthia.
Thanks for the opportunity to testify on this. I wanted to be here, and I apologize I was not at the last meeting, wasn't aware of it, but I wanted to, let me pull up the materials here. I wanted to testify on this because it's so specifically about the comprehensive plan, which is a major project that I've overseen since I've been here, and we are in the latter stages of that process. What I've handed you are a group of slides from the City Council work session presentation that was last Thursday, and another document that are proposed amendments for your consideration for the resolution. I don't know if it may be unconventional to provide amendments to a resolution in this format, but
Well, what I'll do is take, and I'm sure you have, is send the recommended amendments to the sponsor. I'm not going to recommend any amendments from the committee. I think it's inappropriate to do so. So I'll allow him to view them before we
Yeah,
do
that
that.
makes
Yeah.
that sounds fine. I defer to the law office and to the committee on that. I just, the proposed amendments just clarify some edits that I think are necessary to improve the resolution, make it more accurate, and to maybe not be in conflict with the timeline for the comprehensive plan and plans that we already have to roll out that comprehensive plan. So it came up at the City Council work session on Thursday. We had a pretty robust discussion about the rollout of the comprehensive plan and engagement that we've been thinking about for that. The resolution was referenced in that discussion. The issues as I see them, there's elements of this resolution that in my mind are unarguable. I mean, there should be a strong city council engagement with the comprehensive plan. There should be work sessions with the city council. Those elements in the resolution are perfectly legitimate in my view and should be there. There's the majority of the whereas statements are very legitimate.
On which one?
All of the whereas statements.
Okay, yeah.
I had two very minor amendments to the whereas statements on line 6, where it says, whereas the comprehensive planning process shall include robust and inclusive discussion with all communities and their representatives to develop and plan a shared vision for Annapolis. Rather than saying shall include, I propose to say has included, and this is really because we've been working on the comprehensive plan for 3+ years now. One of the slides that I handed you has a summary of all of the community touch points that we've had during that process, which started prior to COVID. It went through COVID. We shifted our way of working to be all virtual during that process. We've sort of rolled with the times.
Absolutely. Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah.
So before you continue with your amendments, I just want to know what the thought process is, and I'm understanding that the thought process I believe of this resolution was it should have this, and we're not going to do anything until the comp plan does this. And you're saying it does. I mean, pretty much your objective is to amend it to say it does, and this is the path forward. So it does beg the question, though, what is the purpose of this resolution? And I think what I see is that you agree, which I thought was surprising, that you agree that no zoning changes substantial zoning changes should happen before this comp plan. Is that what?
Right.
Keep continuing, but that's the gist of this resolution. Is the
You're correct. I mean, the last statement of the resolution essentially puts off any significant zoning changes till after the comprehensive plan is complete. I suggested simply changing that to no zoning changes other than zoning text amendments. And I changed that prior. It's standard practice to not make major zoning changes unless they are in the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
Now, I know this resolution was precipitated by the workforce housing legislation 040-22. It's staff opinion that the 2009 comprehensive plan made the protection and creation of workforce housing an urgent need for the city that needed legislation. And very little happened in the subsequent years since that 2009 comprehensive plan related to workforce housing. It's staff opinion that we don't need another comprehensive plan to clarify the urgency of that issue. And therefore we should not be putting off changes to zoning that would improve workforce housing. But what we don't typically do is come up with whole zoning districts or eliminate zoning districts or expand zoning districts without explicit clarification in a comprehensive plan. The text changes that were proposed in 040-22 don't do that. And, they're text changes, and there's a process in the city code for advancing text changes. And so that's the subtlety there. I mean, I think that the comprehensive plan update that we're working on now, Annapolis Head 2040, will have more guidance related to zoning, but really, the making improvements to our zoning that improve workforce housing should be a priority. And, the city has been out of compliance with the Fair Housing Act for many years. And that's been proven out in, yes.
Alderman Schandelmeyer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How long have we known we've been out of compliance with the Fair Housing Act?
Well, I can just say that, my colleague Teresa Wellman,
And I wouldn't answer that on the floor.
2015. That's when we had the report that said how long we've been out of compliance. 2015.
I would think you.
Sorry.
I'd rather him answer it than you.
well,
Sorry, man.
I mean, it's
No one is a loss.
it is it's something that we need to address, and it's when legislation tries to do that, yeah.
Alderwoman Tierney?
In the 2009 comprehensive plan, you addressed workforce housing. You had elevations showing workforce housing. You addressed it, and I think that's a fundamental disagreement with the sponsors of this bill. So that's why I'm concerned his amendments won't go anywhere with the sponsors. But when you say I'm fast forwarding to your last sentence, are you saying here, by adding other than text changes, that the workforce housing bill would be considered a text change and not a zoning?
It is a text change.
Okay, so bingo bango, we could work with, we got to sponsor these amendments.
Well, the issue is so what we'll do tonight is,
We accept them.
no, we'll move them to the 17th as well. And let me just confer with the committee. In my opinion,
That's how it's been, though.
Yeah. Awesome. So what we'll do is I'll make a motion to recommend favorably
Yes.
to the council the amendments proposed by the chief of comprehensive planning. Is there a second?
Second,
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I hate process arguments.
no, but we don't want to.
I find them tedious, but I believe what we would do instead is, instead of making a motion on amendments that, while drafted by the Planning and Zoning Office, aren't officially in the record, so we can't really give a recommendation of any meaning. What we could do as a committee, and it would not require a vote, is we all want to submit these amendments as co-sponsors of them, or all co-sponsor. Is that a correct interpretation of process and procedure, or am I entirely wrong? Or only a little wrong? If I'm only a little wrong.
So we're looking at the recommended amendments on this one pager. And the question is, there's a motion on the floor to move these to, or recommend favorably. And so we are halting that motion on the floor to ask if we recommend these favorably, or if we postpone any recommendations tonight and as a committee submit them to the Office of Law to be drafted and voted on our meeting on the 17th.
You can go either way with that, with this. If the committee adopts these
Right, just do you want to do it?
as one amendment, then it'd be a committee amendment, and then Alderman Gay, as chairman, would be the sponsor of the bill, or the sponsor of the amendment.
All three of us would be.
If you choose not to do that, you could also introduce these on the floor as an amendment with all three of you as sponsors.
Not too
It's,
much.
Well, yeah, let's do it.
it doesn't make any difference which way you go.
Okay, so just while we have the point of order open, as my did I use the correct language in my motion? I made a motion to recommend favorably the amendments from the Chief of Comprehensive Planning. Is that a solid? Okay, so I've got the motion on the floor. Is there a second?
But would
Alderman
would-
Tierney,
would
seconded.
Oh,
add-
oh.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you please.
Correct, but could we add that we would like to, we're recommending favorably, but we would like to adopt them as the Housing Committee's amendments.
Okay.
Is it amendment or amendments? We'd have to itemize.
Amendments. Amendments.
What?
Oh, it can be one?
You can make it as one amendment if you decide to accept all of it.
Yes.
It could be one amendment.
Yes.
You could do part of it.
No.
You could take something out if you don't like it, and
No,
that'll be the
one amendment.
It's up to you.
So how do I back out of this motion? Do I just, because we've already got a motion on the floor that's been seconded.
We can vote it down and then do a new motion.
All right, let's do that. That's easy. Okay. I've got a motion on the floor to recommend the amendment to the Chief of Comprehensive Planning to the full council. Is there a second? You had a second. All in favor?
No.
No,
Opposed? No. Okay, that motion fails. The next motion on the floor is to recommend favorably
and to adopt them as ours.
and to adopt the recommended amendments as a committee. Is there a motion on that?
So moved.
Second?
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
aye.
Okay.
Are you okay with that, Eric?
Absolutely. I think maybe for the benefit of anybody watching, I mean, another element of this that is in the resolution that I think makes it challenging to complete the comp plan, and which we tried to address, is the community engagement component. Where there is full agreement that we need to have a robust community outreach campaign once we have a draft comprehensive plan, and we need to make sure that every resident of the city has ample opportunity to review it and comment on it. There was an element in the resolution that offered to create a citizens advisory committee. We discussed this at the work session. We felt, it's my opinion that we had that. We have a planning commission that has a very important role to play in this comprehensive plan approval process. If the intent of the Citizens Advisory Committee is to make sure that there's a citizen engagement component, that we absolutely want to have that, but we propose to do it differently. And I think Alderwoman Finlayson had some good ideas that we're responding to. And basically during the 60-day review period that's required by the state, we would be doing an outreach campaign across the city through in-person and virtual meetings and online, through the website, to basically ensure that all citizens of the city have opportunities to improve on the comprehensive plan, review it. And
You're talking about review of the draft.
yeah, when we have a draft, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's,
But what's
That
the
is the-
time? What's the timeline on that?
well, so the goal right now is to have a draft by the end of May,
Okay.
and then it would go to the planning commission. They would commence the 60-day review period, and they would also review it and have public hearings through the planning commission, likely towards the end of the summer. But we said in these amendments that we would aim to have the draft back to city council by the end of September.
Okay.
So that's
and
the-
we're only late because of COVID, right?
That's the primary reason.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean it's COVID and the fact that we have just major generational capital projects going on in the city. That it's like every major capital project.
It's the mayor's fault. No.
Yeah, I mean
I'm
it's
saying like you're
there's a
no, it's-
unique confluence of major projects happening in the city right now that make it very difficult to.
So why don't you change the name? Because Annapolis Ahead 2040 just, yeah, why don't you change the name?
You mean to a later date or?
Yeah, so that it's consistent with the timeline of the future comprehensive plans.
Well, so we are gonna have to have another comprehensive. We do it in line with the census data. So when
So
that
every
comes
decade,
out, so
right?
we'll have more census data in 2030, and we will have to do another comprehensive plan. But it's a 20-year horizon typically with comprehensive plans. So, the census data, in theory, was supposed to come out in 2020. It came out in 2021. The idea was, you look from 2020 to 2040.
Mm-hmm.
It will probably be 2020. Late 23 when this is adopted, or early 24. But yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I mean, but
No, it's just a small observation. Alderwoman Tierney?
So what I was hearing from my colleagues at that work session were they were asking for public input, more public input, actually before you published the draft, I think, and that was what was concerning. So you're going to go to print with a draft, basically, and then per state law, you'll have that review process. I think that's, and I don't know, right? That's what I was hearing from my colleagues,
Well-
is that they were like, whoa, how did this, you
Yeah, and
know?
he answered in his in the documents he just showed us where they had.
Oh, gosh,
X
yeah,
amount of meetings.
I
Yeah.
know. That's why I
Well,
called attention
I think-
to it during the meeting.
Yeah.
And any ideas that we had about public input should have been addressed, in those meetings. They did all the work sessions.
I mean, not just the work sessions are fine, but they had 25 meetings, in-person presentations in pre-COVID, 23 meetings virtual during COVID, 49 meetings of work groups and task force, 18 meetings of the city council and planning commissions, 1,131 responses from community surveys, and 200 comments received. And so I'll do everybody one last question on this, and then we'll close out. My question is, where can I find the public water access plan and the military installation resiliency study?
So those are both on the city's website. I should say the public water, they both have web pages on the city's website, dedicated web pages. So really, if you type,
Public water access plan. Annapolis.
candidly, if you type in Annapolis Public Water Access Plan, I think the first link you'll get is to that website that we've set up. And it,
Awesome. Alderwoman Tierney?
Who's taken the lead on the military one? Is that Jackie?
that's been
Goff?
Jackie Guild. I've been supporting her on it. And that one, there is a draft document that was shared a few weeks ago. That one is basically aiming to wrap up in the next few weeks. That project looked at every critical asset in the city, in the larger Annapolis Neck Peninsula area, and provided guidance on how to protect those assets. And then the public water access plan, that's going to be done in the early summer. We're going to have a draft plan probably by June to share with the public for comments.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So will take effect probably this summer of 2024. Any recommendations? Alderman Schandemeyer, any last question?
Not for Mr. Lashinsky, but on the resolution, is that appropriate at the time, or do you want to wrap up on Mr. Lashinsky specifically?
Yeah, let's wrap up here because we'll postpone any recommendation on. Well, do we have to postpone any recommendation because we've just made amendments, and so
What I wanted to bring
will that
forward
just go
was
to the 17th meeting? I'm assuming. Yeah.
what I wanted to bring forward was a separate amendment from the planning and zoning amendments, because whether or not I keep it on there or withdraw, it's dependent on if the planning and zoning amendments pass forward
Well, they just passed.
through the body
you
as a
mean through
whole.
Okay, so well, why don't you just wait until the 17th then to introduce your amendment
Okay.
so that we can hear them all at the same time?
Okay.
If you want to do it tonight, you can, but I'm just
I just
asking.
want to, if I can give this to the law office for drafting, and I want to state my reasoning on the record
Okay, go
with
ahead.
us. On page 2, line 44 through 46, page 3, lines 1 and 2, I would like those struck. The essential purpose of those is to go, we are going to consider what the county does for our zoning. And why I want those struck is if the planning and zoning amendments do not pass, I think is very important to strike those, because what that does is it gives up any semblance of city leadership into trying to solve our housing crisis and going, county, you need to solve our problems, because we want to keep Annapolis zoning as exclusive as possible. That shows a colossal lack of leadership to me. I think it comes across as very economically segregationist, and I think they're bad. So, Mr. Lushinsky, that said, because I do know your amendments addressed a lot of that in a way that I would rather them all get scrapped, that portion gets scrapped, but I find your amendments would put a less bitter taste in my mouth on that front. So I would withdraw it if your amendments passed, but that's why I want that portion introduced as a separate non-committee amendment, if that's all right.
Well, that's fine, but put it in writing.
Yep.
It's, and you were amending first reader?
Yes, that would
So
be a
there-
first reader amendment on R123, separate from the planning and zoning recommended amendments that the committee adopted.
All right, just to clarify that the amendment refers to, the line numbers refer to the line numbers of the first reader.
Of the first reader, yes. And that would be Schandelmeyer amendment, not committee amendment.
Right. Please forward it to me, email.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions for this item? Any other? You good? Awesome. Thank you so much.
Motion to delay action?
We'll make a motion to postpone R123 until April the 17th.
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
I just wanted a discussion with the amendment, or with the replacement, what, I mean.
Well, with our amendments, yeah, that will,
Whatever, the path forward.
Yeah,
You don't
yeah,
want
yeah.
to be in the same.
which I will also shoot an email just to make sure that we get those in from the committee. That's perfect. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lushinsky.
That concludes the agenda of the Housing and Human Welfare Committee. Is there anything for the good of the order? I can't think of anything right now. Yes, Alderman Schandelmeyer.
Housing availability update. As of the 20th, according to apartments.com, this is the amount of housing units you could rent and move into on April 1st. There are currently 113 rentals in the city and county. That is a population close to 100,000, by the way. Only 78 of those are in the city. There are only 34 that you could rent in the city for $2,000 or less, and there are only 4 that you could rent for $1,500 or less. The housing market here is bad. Let's build more housing.
I appreciate that update.
I think it's just for the good of the order is that I think what's happening with this workforce housing is that it's being equated to like what did I say, 3-story massive development. And I was driving, I go down West
Your
Street.
mic.
Oh, I'm not on the mic. I would like to call attention to when my colleagues that are very concerned about this workforce housing and what it looks like. I drive by the apartment complex on Chickapin and West Street, right? That has the Starbucks. And to me, that's ideal. Like, that's what we're talking about, and it fits in architecturally, scale-wise. I just know that the workforce housing bill will never pass if my colleagues are afraid of what it's going to be. And when I look at that, I'm like, this is okay, right?
I mean, when you look at everything in this city, it is to me like, duh. I mean, why wouldn't you put, I don't know. I just hope that we can get a solution quick, because the people need help. The people need help. And as they, there's a party in New York, the rent is too damn high party, which I may be joining soon because it's crazy out here. So, with that, I'll close discussion on the Housing and Human Welfare meeting tonight. Thank you all very much.
I'll join that caucus. Anyway.
Julian, you proceed.